Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, Part 9. Avachyavadamsya bahun vadishyanti tavahitaha nindantastava samarthyam tato dukkataram nukim. Your enemies, disparaging your strength, will speak many unbecoming words. What can be more distressing than this? Your sworn enemies such as Duryodhana, Dushasana and Karna, etc., in spite of knowing your deeds of valor, will slander your strength and will laugh at you and call you effeminate and impotent. How will you bear those insolent jokes and irreparable ignominy? What can be more painful than this? It is generally seen that a person of respectable and high standing cannot tolerate the insult done by the persons of low standing, and he performs deeds of mighty valor beyond expectation. Similarly, you will not be able to tolerate the ignominy and slander, and so there will be no alternative for you but to wage the war that has been declared. So, how will you bear that ignominy? After explaining the adverse consequences of not waging the war in the preceding 4 verses, now in the next 2 verses, Sri Krishna Paramatma explains the favorable consequences of the war. Hato va prapsyasi swargam jitva va bhokshyase mahim tasmatuttishta kaunteya yuddhaya krita nischayaha. Slain in battle, you will gain heaven. Gaining victory, you will enjoy sovereignty of the earth. Therefore, arise, O son of Kunti, determined to fight. In the 6th verse of this chapter, Arjuna raised a question that they did not know whether they would conquer the sons of Dhritarashtra or Dhritarashtra's sons would conquer them. So, Sri Krishna Paramatma answers the question and says, if you are killed by Karna, you will attain heaven, and if you gain victory, you will enjoy the kingdom. Thus, a righteous welfare will abound with welfare both here and hereafter. So, you should be prepared to wage the war because it is the only panacea against the incorrigible. Here, Sri Krishna Paramatma, by addressing Arjuna as Kaunteya, wants to remind him of the message to wage the war sent by his mother when he went to the Kauravas with a proposal of treaty. Therefore, he should rise to the occasion with full determination. Arjuna was determined not to fight, and Sri Krishna Paramatma in the 3rd verse of this chapter ordered him to rise to the occasion. Here, Arjuna is in a dilemma whether to wage the war or not. So, Sri Krishna Paramatma exhorts him to be determined to fight without having any doubt. Here it seems that Sri Krishna Paramatma wants to say that everyone should discharge his duty very sincerely and enthusiastically to the best of his power and ability in whatever circumstances he is placed. Humanity demands it. Sukha dukke same kritva labha labhau jaya jayau tato yuddhaya yujyasva naivam papamavapsyasi. Treating alike pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat, engage yourself in the battle. Thus, fighting, you will incur no sin. Arjuna was thinking that by killing his kinsmen, he would incur sin. So, here Sri Krishna Paramatma clarifies that it is not the war but desire which induces a man to incur sin. So, by renouncing desire, he should be engaged in the war. In the war, a man either gains victory or suffers defeat. Victory results in gain while defeat results in loss. The worldly people view gain with pleasure and loss with pain. But your aim is not to be tossed about by victory and defeat, gain and loss, and pleasure and pain, but your aim is to discharge your duty by treating the agreeable and the disagreeable alike. By doing so, you will incur no sin. You will be free from bondage. Everyone should discharge his duty earnestly and efficiently, whether he has a desire or not for its fruit. By refusing to be affected by favorable and unfavorable circumstances, the mind becomes steady. So, treating the two alike, one should discharge one's duty. Moreover, one should not perform an action for pleasure and refrain from another for fear of its pain. The scriptures should be the authority in deciding what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Here, the word sin has been used both for sin and virtue. The former leads to the bondage of hell and the latter to the bondage of heaven. Both of them deprive a man of salvation and enable him to follow the cycle of birth and death. So, Sri Krishna Paramatma exhorts Arjuna to discharge his duty of waging the war by being even-minded. This will help him to escape the bondage of sin and virtue. Something noteworthy. In this section of 8 verses from the 31st to the 38th, Sri Krishna Paramatma has emphasized several marvelous facts as below. Number 1. While delivering a discourse or explaining a subject, the beginning should deal with the positive aspect, the middle with the negative aspect, and the conclusion should again deal with the positive aspect. In this context also, Sri Krishna Paramatma in the 31st and the 32nd verses explains the favorable consequences of discharging the duty. In the middle, from the 33rd to the 36th verses, he explains the adverse consequences of not performing the duty, and again concludes in the 37th and the 38th verses by explaining the favorable consequences of discharging the duty and orders Arjuna to discharge his duty. Number 2. In these verses, Sri Krishna Paramatma has also clarified the doubts arising in the mind of Arjuna. For example, Arjuna says, "I don't foresee any good ensuing from the slaughter of my kinsmen." Sri Krishna Paramatma replies in verse 31 of this chapter that there is nothing more welcome to a man of the warrior class than a righteous war. In 37th verse, Arjuna says, "How can we, by killing our kinsmen, be happy?" Sri Krishna Paramatma replies, "Happy are the Kshatriyas who get the opportunity of waging such an unsolicited warfare." Again, Arjuna says the consequence of the war will lead to hell. Sri Krishna Paramatma says the war is an open gateway to heaven. In the 36th verse of the chapter 1, Arjuna says sin alone will accrue to us by waging the war and by slaying them. Sri Krishna Paramatma replies in the 2nd chapter 33rd verse, "If you don't wage such a righteous war and abandon your duty, you will incur sin." Again, Arjuna says the result of the war will be that impiety will take hold of the entire family. Sri Krishna Paramatma replies, "If you don't wage such a righteous war, you will abandon your duty, that is righteousness. Number 3. Arjuna insists and says it is better to live on alms than to wage the war. Therefore, Sri Krishna Paramatma orders him to wage the war. Uddhava had a desire to live with Sri Krishna Paramatma. So, Sri Krishna Paramatma ordered him to go to the northern mountains and do penance there. It means that desire of any type is an obstacle to salvation. Number 4. In these verses, Sri Krishna Paramatma has explained in details some of the things which were explained in brief in the 2nd and 3rd verses of this chapter. For example, there the expression Anarya Jushtam, that is, it is shunned by noble souls, was used. Here the expression Dharmyadi Yuddhat Shreyo Nyat, any other thing more welcome than a righteous war, has been used. There the term Aswargyam, that is, not leading to heaven, was used. Here the expression Swargadvaram Aparvatam, an open gateway to heaven, has been used. There the term Akirtikaram, not bringing fame, was used. Here the expression Akirtim Chapi Bhutani Katayishyanti Te Vyavyam, All creatures will even recount your undying infamy has been used. There, Sri Krishna Paramatma ordered Arjuna to fight by using the expression Tyaktvosta Parantapa. Here also, he orders him to fight by using the expression Tato Yuddhaya Yujyasva. The Lord in the next two verses permits Arjuna to be guided by even-mindedness, already mentioned in the preceding verse, and he describes its glory. Esha te bihita samkhye buddhir yoge tvimam shrunu buddhya yukto yaya partha karma bandham prahasyasi. O Partha, this attitude of mind has been presented to you from the point of view of Jnana Yoga, that is, discipline of knowledge. Now hear the same as presented from the point of view of Karma Yoga, the discipline of selfless action. Equipped with this state of mind, you will be able to shake off completely the shackles of karma, that is, action. Here the word tu, that is indeed, has been used to show that now there is a description of the discipline of action which is different from the discipline of knowledge. The term Isha has been used for equanimity, which has been described in the preceding verse and which has already been explained in the discipline of knowledge, from the 11th to the 30th verses. When a man discriminates between the body and the soul, he gets established in equanimity automatically because it is attachment to the body which is an obstacle in the way of equanimity. So, this ideal of equanimity has already been presented from the point of view of Sankhya Yoga, that is, discipline of knowledge. Now, listen to a discourse on equanimity in the context of Karma Yoga, that is, discipline of action. Imam, that is, this term has been used to explain how this equanimity is attained by the discipline of action and what its importance is. Arjuna was afraid of the sin that would accrue by waging the war. But Sri Krishna Paramatma means to say that sin does not accrue by waging the war, as it is our duty, but it accrues by having attachment and aversion. So, if you attain equanimity, no sin will accrue, and your duty of waging the war will not lead you to bondage. In the 7th verse of this chapter, Arjuna asked Sri Krishna Paramatma to tell him what was good for him. Hence, Sri Krishna Paramatma answers his query. First, he mentioned the means of Sankhya Yoga, discipline of knowledge, and then laid great stress on performance of duty and told him that there was nothing more welcome to a Kshatriya than a righteous war. Then he told him that no sin would accrue if he had equanimity. Now he explains the same equanimity in the context of Karma Yoga, discipline of action. A Karma Yogi performs action in order to set an example to the masses without any selfish motive. By doing so, he attains equanimity easily. Having attained equanimity, he is easily liberated from the bondage of actions. This 39th verse should have been placed before the 30th verse as it rightly belongs there, because from the 11th verse to the 30th verse, the Lord explained even-mindedness from the view of the discipline of knowledge, and now he describes it from the view of discipline of action. So it seems that it is improper to insert these 8 verses from the 31st to the 38th here, but actually it is not so. The reason is that before describing equanimity in the discipline of action, it is necessary to describe what one ought to do and what one ought not to do. It was Arjuna's duty to wage the righteous war. It was not his duty to abandon war, because by doing so he would incur sin. So Sri Krishna Paramatma in these 8 verses described what Arjuna ought to do and what he ought not to do. Then he explained equanimity. It means that first, from the 11th verse to the 30th verse, he explained equanimity through the description of the real and the unreal, by mentioning that the real is real and the unreal is unreal, and no one can change them. Then, from the 31st verse to the 38th verse, having explained the topic of what one ought to do and what one ought not to do, from the 39th verse, he exhorts Arjuna never to desist from his duty, but always perform his duty with even mindedness, in success and failure.